What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, Cheesehead TV, joined by a very special guest, Mr. Matt Harmon. You might know his work through a number of different places, most prominently Yahoo, but certainly Reception Perception and other various fantasy outlets. Matt, how are you today, man?
Man, I'm doing great. I'm so glad we're getting to have this conversation for multiple reasons. One, because you and I met at the Combine this year for the first time, even though we have known each other for like
one of those
decade.
Exactly, like at least a decade online, right? Yeah, no doubt.
I feel like I've actually had a lot of that this past year, which has been great. Like actually getting to speak to the people that I've known online for like 10 years. So number one, excited to talk to you again. And two, my business partner, my good friend James Coe, and I joke all the time at Reception Perception that we spend an absurd amount of time talking about this Packers wide receiver room.
Yeah.
And I think for good reason,
Yes.
but I'm actually excited to talk about it in front of hopefully some listeners and viewers that really, really care about it, as opposed to our poor listeners and viewers who are probably like, all right, we get it, enough already.
I will admit, I know you put something out on X about this a couple weeks ago, and that was kind of my impetus for reaching out, because I was like, I can understand how a fantasy audience in particular might be like, okay, I understand these guys are all talented, but it's very hard to shoehorn any of them into a fantasy lineup on a consistent basis, right?
Totally. And I think even just for our Reception Perception subscribers, which, you know, there's a lot of fantasy players. There's also just a lot of like NFL folks that like want to figure out the game and want to dive deeper into it. Like we always joke, James and I, that we're kind of the alignment bros, like, okay,
Right.
This guy plays this role. And because of that, this success rate or this coverage beating ability is more important. This route is more important. And I think for this Packers group that is kind of like they don't have a Justin Jefferson type where everybody is in his orbit, even shoot like a much lesser player than that, like the Denver Broncos and Cortland Sutton. They have one guy that is on the field for 90% of the routes, and then quite literally nobody else is on the field for more than 50% last year.
Right.
It is just Cortland Sutton and a lot of guys in his orbit. The Packers don't really have that player, which I think makes them really fun for us to discuss. Again, even if our listeners are like, that's enough already with the Packers stuff.
Well, what I appreciate about what you guys do, it's a great intersection of not just the analytics side of it, which certainly there is that, but you guys grind the tape. Like it's so clear that you actually look at the game. You're looking at, like you just mentioned, the coverages and things like that, as far as what routes are working, not who is kind of leaning into certain routes and really having success, etc. I really appreciate that approach, and I'm sure the viewers and listeners here at Cheesehead TV will as well, which is why I wanted to talk to you about the Packers wide receivers. And I'm not really going to kind of shoehorn this into a fantasy angle of it, although I know that will undoubtedly come up from time to time. But I didn't want to start with, kind of just work top down, because I know there's a lot of conversation and, let's even say, disagreement about some of these guys as far as what their long-term kind of going concerns are, both in Green Bay and in the league. And I wanted to start with Romeo Dobbs, because obviously ending the year the way he did with a couple of concussions pretty hard on each other, I think has kind of masked or maybe even overshadowed a lot of the good work he has done so far in Green Bay. What do you see when you look at Dobbs? Because I do think, to an outside non-fan eye, I think there's a much better receiver there than maybe the lack of production at certain times and, the lack of really big eye-changing plays, maybe fans have come a little disillusioned, but I still think, like I said, that he's a really good player.
Yeah. Last offseason, I started talking about what I called the sacrificial X receiver. And I actually feel like it's, you do this long enough, like you're surprised by what has caught on. I actually hear a lot of other people saying it now too, which of all the things I've done, like all the work I've done, that's the thing that's caught on.
Hey, if I'm only known for Draft Industrial Complex for the rest of my life, I am fine. Like that,
right.
That's been my contribution.
Yeah.
So it's
good. So if my contribution is sacrificial X receiver, that's totally fine. But I think the reason that I talked about that is that, and this is instructive for the Packers, is because like we can do all these fun things with like, hey, we're moving these guys around, motion at the snap. We're trying to get, a guy like Christian Watson, who is built like a traditional X receiver, like the old school number one size, speed, whatever, but he's not necessarily like that type of consistent technician. We want to get him like these big over routes in the slot and stuff like that. Well, in order to do that, you still need one guy to do the big boy stuff, do the like he's on the line of scrimmage. He doesn't really move around very much. And he is that sacrificial X receiver. The sacrificial part of it is he's got to run a lot of vertical routes to clear things out. So that player is not necessarily going to pop from like a targets per route run or even necessarily always like a yards per route run, because his function is not necessarily always to get the football on that play. And I think that Dobbs was like one of those guys to start his career. Now, I think his rookie season was a little bit messy. He's trouble separating. He's got one of the higher drop rates that I've ever charted as a rookie, but I think he's somebody that's had like incremental growth every step of his career. And even last year, at times, I thought he was their most consistent player. And that's a big step forward for a room where I think there's a lot of really talented players and players I'm probably higher on like long-term than Romeo Dobbs. But again, it was just, we're not having the fantasy conversation, but when people were like frustrated with, can we just get like Dantavian Wixson on the field or all some of these other guys? It's like, I understand like why you want to see these guys, because there are some really interesting young players, but the problem is like, if Romeo Dobbs was 10% worse, I think you could say like, hey, we can upgrade on him or whatever. But the problem is he's not. Like he's good and reliable in this role. Certainly, I agree with you. The concussions, that's something to be concerned about. Maybe he doesn't have the long-term upside of some of these other players. But again, if we're going to do all that fun stuff with like the orbit motions with Jaden Reed, or like I said, trying to get these guys in mismatches in the slot, you got to have one guy to go out there and eat snaps at that X receiver position. And Dobbs, to his credit, has done that really well.
And the thing is you can look at production as well. Like as far as converting third into first down, he did that at an incredible rate last year. And I do think you talk about a guy you can trust. I mean, it's Jordan Love trusts him implicitly on any third down situation, or even you look at the touchdowns he's caught. He's caught more touchdowns than anybody in his rookie class. Like up to this point,
that's crazy.
That's I know, right? But that's what I always talk about. Like I understand he's not flashy, but man, he is a solid receiver. And then you mentioned Christian Watson, and obviously we won't see him on the field to start the season, but there is the expectation he's a little bit ahead of schedule from that ACL. You never really know what to expect for a guy coming off an injury. And I'm very interested in what you said there, as far as you don't really have the technician that you would like. And I think there's something to that, right? As far as the size, speed, the athletic traits, all of that is readily apparent. There's zero doubt there. And I also think you can look at his blocking in the run game, and he is outstanding in that regard. And he doesn't make noise when he doesn't get the football, which he didn't for a whole good stretch of the start of the last season. But man, I'm telling you, he's still a big play waiting to happen.
Absolutely. And I think that's why he pops in a lot of these like yards per route run metrics and things like that, because like when he makes plays, especially last year, I think they were really good about like, okay, we have enough guys, to get like quick slants. Cause you mentioned Dobbs was really good about, hey, it's like 3rd and 6. He's going to beat man coverage, like win on a quick slant. And, he's not going to pile up yards after that, but he's going to be where he needs to be. And like, we've got guys to do that, like running stick routes and things of that nature. Like let's let Christian Watson just roll down the field, especially when they have all these other options. And like I said, Christian Watson's a guy who throughout the course of his career has never just been an outside on the line of scrimmage player. They've moved him around to try to weaponize him, because like you go back to his 2023 reception perception profile, like over 60% success rate on the nines, the posts, and the corners. And he took like a nice step forward on dig routes, which I think that was a good piece of development in that 2023 season. He's a little bit better working over the deep middle than maybe he was as a rookie. Now, again, there's still big flaws in his game, in my opinion, as a route runner, and that's why he can't really just be like a featured player, but he's certainly a useful part of this receiver room that, like I said, when they want to go for big plays, he's got big play juice. I don't think, again, he's the most consistent player to be like a true number 1 or even like a number 2. I don't know about that, but I think he's great in the role that he currently holds down, or at least has held down in the past.
Now, and you kind of draw back now from the Packers offense in general, right? And Watson will miss a decent amount of time. And then you turn around and you look at the selection of Matthew Golden, a guy who has speed for days, but is a very different player than Christian Watson. But certainly that speed element is welcome for a team that was going to be missing Watson. What do you see here as far as a fit within Matt LaFleur's offense? Because I know, if you look at his career in college from Houston to Texas, and I mean, he really had an amazing stretch down there at the end of his college career, but you saw a really inconsistent player prior to that. How do you see him kind of projecting to the league, to the NFL, to the Packers offense in particular?
Yeah, so it's really funny with what you said about Matthew Golden, because and comparing him to Christian Watson in terms of how they're like different players. Because they like if they stood next to each other, they would appear very different in terms of like size and the physicality and all of that stuff. But they're both fast players, and while they are different in some ways, I actually think functionally how you would deploy them, there is kind of some similarity, because like if you look at again Christian Watson's reception perception route chart versus Matthew Golden, there is some overlap in terms of the routes that they succeed on, and it is a lot of the vertical stuff. I think that Golden struggles a little bit to like consistently separate against press coverage on these like layup routes, like we're talking about with Romeo Dobbs, like what he did pretty well last year. His success rate versus press and reception perception as a prospect was kind of, around the prospect average, but he was a really good zone beater, and he could really rip it on these big over routes down the field, which when they took Matthew Golden, my first thought was, oh man, I can see it now, like a deep post route off play action, and maybe Jordan Love's throwing it off that back foot, but it gets there because he's got the arm to do it.
Got the hose, right?
He's got exactly. I could visualize that in my brain. Not to mention, like, I think that and I'm curious what you think about this, because I think the prevailing thought at the end of last season was, okay, yeah, it was cute that the Packers talked about they had all these receivers to throw out there, but they really need a number one. I'm like, okay, easier said than done. Tell me where you find that guy. Like, guess what? They don't get to free agency. Like that you have to trade for them.
They don't get to free agency, and they don't fall to 22 in the draft.
Usually
issue,
not.
Right?
Like sometimes you can get a guy there and they become that, but it's not just
over
like
time,
you take that player and then like they're ready to rock and they're an elite number one from day one. Really, to me, what they needed someone to stretch the field consistently, and I think be more of like a true consistent technician, where if I am stacking up Matthew Golden versus Christian Watson and some of the differences, I do think he is a more technically sound player. At the same time, I do think he has all these Packers receivers, man. We're gonna keep saying the D word, like they have issues with drops.
Yep.
But I think that Matthew Golden, for his size, he's weirdly similar to Jaden Reed when we get to him. Reed like dropped the layups, but made big plays he took a huge step in contested situations. And weirdly, I think that Matthew Golden is one of those type of players too. So I think that he fits really well in this offense and continues to kind of, if Christian Watson can't get all the way back this year, which usually the first year off an ACL is not, especially when it's that late in the season, it's not the best year of their career. And obviously he's on the expiring contract as well. I think he just slides right into that role and is also one of these guys that, you mentioned like the production wasn't always there for him. The plays were definitely available at Texas throughout the course of last year. It kind of took them a minute to, the quarterback play was also a mess, but they were kind of trying, a little bit. They were kind of trying to funnel the offense through Isaiah Bond. And I think it took Steve Sarkisian, that coaching staff, a minute to be like, hey, we're looking at the tape and we can actually see like the more consistent option is Matthew Golden. And when it got to crunch time, that's the guy that they funneled it through.
I don't doubt that it's going to be exciting to see him in LaFleur's offense. And you mentioned Jaden Reed, and I got to admit, when they took Golden and Golden became a real thing, because I got to admit, up until the draft, until the moment it happened, I was like, there's no way they're taking Matthew Golden. They haven't taken a receiver in the first round in so long.
They made a big deal about it that night, too.
They most certainly did. They leaned into it, no doubt. But the moment it happened, I did think, now, could this possibly be a guy in Golden who takes some of that orbit stuff away from Reed? And I don't mean that as a slight to Reed, because I think Reed's a phenomenal player.
Yeah.
And I do think he was pressing way too much last year. And you saw it in the drops, both on third and fourth down. And like you mentioned, some layups. I mean, some gimmies in his hands, in his breadbasket that he drops, right? I think he's an insanely talented player, which still has a ton of upside that he has not even scratched. And I do wonder if maybe they give Golden some of that stuff, some of the horizontal orbit, etc., just to take a little bit off Reed's plate, because I'm sure you're aware, like Reed doesn't play when they're in two wide receiver sets. He just doesn't see the field, right? So he's always out there as either a slot guy, occasionally on the perimeter, but they're running him around, down in and down out. I do wonder if maybe they give some of that to Golden just to alleviate Reed's plate and let him just kind of focus, because I think, like I said, you get him right on the drops, you got a ascending NFL star in my eyes.
I love Jaden Reed. I was a huge fan of him as a prospect. And the funny part about why I loved him so much as a prospect relative to kind of the player, I don't know that the Packers have necessarily pigeonholed him as this way, but certainly I think a lot of fans, not even just Packers fans, but like NFL people and fantasy analysts have pigeonholed him as this like kind of gadget guy because he gets those like gadgety sort of designery touches.
You see those touches and you think, okay, that's who he is, right? Yeah, especially highlight reels and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, the reason I liked him as a prospect was he was relative to like a guy who saw a lot of press coverage at Michigan State, was the best press beater in that 2023 class. Like he had real deal release moves at the line of scrimmage. He was somebody that I described as like, you mentioned like a guy that was pressing a little bit. And I think this is funny to actually go back because I read the profile recently when James and I did a show on this, the old prospect profile. I wrote him up as somebody that like with a couple more tweaks as both a route runner and in the contested catch game, I think he could be like a Stephon Diggs type of player. He just has to get better as a finisher. And I think that is like, that's kind of still true.
Spot on.
It's
totally
still true. He needs to get better as a finisher, which, dude, it's his third NFL season. Like I'm not giving up the ghost that he can do that. And he can make the jump in his third NFL season. A lot of these guys, I think we've gotten a little too impatient with wide receivers in general. And that third year breakout can very much still happen. I think he's already a guy that to some degree has broken out. So I'm with you. This is a 74th percentile success rate versus man player last year, 82nd percentile against zone. Doesn't see a lot of press coverage, but when he does, he remains a pretty good press coverage beater. I actually would like to see him on the field more doing wide receiver things.
Thank you.
To your point about Matthew Golden, I think I can see him doing some of that motion stuff. And even the guy they took in the third round, Savon Williams, like when they took him, my first thought, and this is a little bit like how I thought Savon was a weird prospect, but also, because I am a Jaden Reed guy, my first thought was, good God, I hope he's going to take some of the rushing work away from Jaden Reed, because we don't talk about this enough with like all this pre-snap motion stuff and motion at the snap. Like that's cool. But you mentioned it, like he's logging miles and miles.
Like literally over a season, miles. Like
before the play even happens.
Agreed.
It's
totally
a real,
agree.
and I mean, it's a reason that some of these like Miami receivers burn out towards the end of the season with what they do down there. Mike McDaniel's offense too.
I totally agree. And I love Savon Williams. He was one of my draft crushes. And for the second year in a row, the Packers actually took one of my draft crushes, which is
there we go.
Like my whole world is turned upside down now. But I love Savion's game. Like you're talking about, I mean, he had 6 rushing touchdowns last year, and they utilized him a lot out of the backfield at TCU. But also, I think projection wise, you look at him, he could be a classic Packers wide receiver, maybe even an X. I mean, down the road, if he develops, he's got the size, he's got enough speed, he's got the contested catch ability, and he's physical as hell. Like to me, that if I'm the Packers, I think that's what they're looking for long term. But to get the ball to him this year, I think what you're talking about there makes all the sense in the world.
So it's funny when I wrote up Savon Williams, like I think from like a route standpoint, he's very, very raw. And I think that TCU even acknowledged that by the fact that, put him as like a wildcat quarterback. As a runner. Put him, put him in the backfield a ton, almost kind of turned him into a Cordero Patterson type player, which maybe that is actually what he ends up being for the Packers.
It's possible.
Especially early if they're trying to get him on the field, that's possible. But he's one of these guys that excels once the ball actually arrives to him. Like
it's insane.
I think of the guys they drafted, like he might have the best hands on the team, like right now, which is insane because I also think he's certainly the rawest route runner of this crew, and he might, like you said, take years to develop. And it's similar to like and the Giants took this player in the first round, which was a bad idea. But like Kadarius Toney, they took him in the first round, and that was like, dude, you're starting at square one as a route runner, but Kadarius was a guy that really struggled also at the catch point, like tracking, snaring the ball, like attacking it properly. And to Savion's credit, he really has good hands. Like he might not be a receiver in the long term. He might move positions or something like that. I know I've talked to Matt Waldman, who is really high on him as like a running back conversion type player. Maybe that's his future, but he is actually a good receiver of the football, which does kind of stand out in this room.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very excited to see his progression. And of course, it's funny, we've talked all this time, and there's a guy sitting there in this Packers wide receiver room that I know is pretty polarizing coming off of his performance last year, and that's Dantavian Wixson, because I know there was a lot of hype around him coming into last year. And then like you go into training camp last summer, and I was just talking about this on my daily chat yesterday. I think people forget he had a really good camp. Like there's a reason the excitement was building, because he had a very promising rookie year. And then you get into camp and he's, Love is chucking it up the left sideline on these 9 routes, and he's scoring big touchdowns. It was happening like once a day in camp. So you're thinking, okay, here we go. And then you get to the season and all the drops happen, and there's miscommunication with Love. And I think he cleaned up a lot of that as the season went on. But even then in the playoff game, he doesn't stack the DB. That results in an interception. And you're just seeing, I think, a player who just wasn't nearly detailed oriented enough. And if the Packers can crack that code, I still think he can be really, really good in the NFL. I just think he's got to get on the details.
I'm so glad you framed it that way, because I think and look, I never like to kind of talk about other receiver charting methodologies or other receiver tracking stuff, but he's a guy that, some services list as like one of the best separators in the NFL. I'm not quite there with him. I was very excited about his separation and route running ability coming out of his rookie season. But like, if you look at his just reception perception success rates across the board, like 70.9% against man this past year. As a rookie, it was 72.2%. Like, he actually kind of took a step back there. His success rate versus zone is literally within 0.3% of itself. And the success rate versus press is the same thing. Like, and I honestly, this is kind of similar with Jaden Reed, although he was better basically across the board there. These two guys like did not get better from year 1 to year 2. I think Reed just kind of stayed the same, and hopefully that jump occurs this year. For Dantavian, he either kind of stayed the same as a route runner separator, but actually I think took a step back over the course of the year. I think it's framed as like, oh, if he can just clean up the drops, like that's all it takes. There's more
that needs to happen. Definitely.
There's way more that needs to happen. And it is mostly like, being right and tight on the details, which, I think he shows that. To me, I really, look, I have no idea. And I don't always love to play armchair psychologist, but this is a guy that, when you look at his like targets per route run, they're very high. Like when he's on the field, Jordan Love, as you said, wants to throw the football to this guy.
100%.
He really wants to, I think, build him up. So that's great. But when then you're dropping all those opportunities, to me, and not even just, it's like not just straight up drops, but also poor play at the catch point in contested situations. Like his contested catch rate is actually even more troubling to me this past year than it was the drop rate or anything. You can't tell me that doesn't build over the course of his season, because it's like, oh yeah, Christian Watson's out. Like, this is my time. I'm a starter. Right? Yep. Drop, contested catch failure. And I think that like trickled its way into the route running and the route technique over the course of the season. But again, I'm not willing to give up on him, because like our cut and dry rule at reception perception, like, hey, if you're an outside receiver, you beat man coverage over 70%, we are interested in you in the long term. Like, this is somebody we want to, Rashad Bateman's a great example. Somebody that was always a good man coverage beater and kind of finally got healthy and put it together last year. Wicks is somebody that honestly, even if he just remains the 4th receiver on this team, he can play all 3 receiver positions, and he is good. So that's fine if that's all he is for what? He was like a 5th round pick by the Packers. But I'm with you that I do think if he can tighten up the details and just get more consistent overall, I think there is a starting NFL receiver there that, hey, maybe in 2026, if Dobbs has moved on and Watson has moved on, I can see a 3 receiver set of Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden, and Dantavian Wicks being a pretty good group.
Yeah, I don't hate that idea at all. Matt, I cannot thank you enough for the time, man. I could keep going. I could go Bo Melton, but he's playing corner now apparently, and we could go Malik Heath. But you've been more than gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. Make sure you're checking out Reception Perception. I'll have a link in the description of this video for you to do so. Matt, thank you so much for making the time, man.
Appreciate you, man. Like I said, we got these takes locked and loaded on these Packers receivers, so hopefully people appreciate it, and I appreciate you having me.